So I'm getting back to work on this rock crawler build. I've been doing the best I can to try and continue chipping away on this thing. We've had a very busy summer, and I'd say over summer, overall, I've only had maybe 6 full days to work on this thing, but I'm doing the best I can, continuing to chip away at it. And so in this video, what I wanted to talk about was the fuel system and how I did the fuel tank and the pickups and all that sort of thing. So the first thing I was going to show is go back a little bit to when I was putting the fuel tank together, and I used something called a Holley Hydromat. How the Holley Hydromat works is basically it's a rectangular shaped deal that's like a filter that will pick up fluid anywhere that fluid's touching it. So if gas is touching it anywhere, it will draw the gas up into the tank. And why that's important, which I used on my other one, is in case you're at sharp angles or hard angles that your fuel pickup's not sticking up in the air. You want it to be picking up fuel when your fuel starts getting lower. So that's why I use the Holley Hydromat on this buggy. All right, I got a bit of a mess going on here. I've got multiple projects I'm working on. I'm working on driveline parts and I've got stuff all over. Anyways, last night I let this fuel cell sit for 24 hours because I used epoxy to glue these little studs in place inside this fuel cell that are going to hold this Holley Hydromat down. And so what happens is you kind of clean an area with a little bit of an abrasive. You take the epoxy, these little holes in the hydromat are going to be, and then you glue down these little studs using these and some epoxy. You let it set for 24 hours, let it fully cure, and then you drop this over those studs and then put a nut on it, and it's going to hold it in place. Another one of these advantages of these Holley Hydromats is they're basically a big filter too. So these things will help keep junk out of your fuel system. And from what they say, fuel just has to be touching this thing somewhere and it'll still suck fuel up in it. So they're amazing of getting every last drop out of your fuel and acting as a filter as well. So I'm going to get this thing installed so that I can keep working on this fuel system. As far as the fuel system, I've got a pump here. A pump that I ordered. This is just a basic Amazon fuel pump. And what I do is I order them with 6 AN fittings. So they already have the AN fittings on it, and I'm not using hose clamps and just rubber hose. So that's my plan for the fuel pump. And then so I also have a regulator. It's going to go from the fuel pump to this regulator. This regulator is adjustable with a gauge on it. I can adjust it what I want the pressure to be. And I did a little research, and I believe the motor I'm using wants about 60 psi of pressure. And once I get that dialed in and it works just fine, I'll probably get rid of the gauge and put a plug in it. But that's my plan for moving forward. I will go from the fuel pump, will suck out of this tank, it will go to this regulator, then up to the fuel rail. And then any return line goes back to the tank to bleed off the excess pressure. The fuel system works is you have the Holley Hydromat on the bottom. The pump draws it through there down to the pump, which I have down here. And this pump I ordered with all AN6 fittings, so it's all AN and everything fits nicely together. Then the pump goes through the regulator, which the regulator, then it goes up through the fuel rail. Then it comes back again and dumps off the excess in the tank. And this is just a universal tank, so I just used where they already had fittings sticking out of the top. It looks a little busier than I wanted it to, but it's just a universal deal. So one of them's a vent. The vent goes all the way up over the top. It goes up over the top and then back down, and then I have it down lower than the tank so that when you flip over, fuel can't pour out. So if the vent goes lower than the tank, when you flip over, no fuel can come spitting out. So that's why I run it up and make that big air gap all the way around it, because it's safer. That summarizes the fuel system. I used all AN6 fittings, adjustable regulator, and that portion's pretty well done. Now the next part I wanted to talk about was the brakes. So I've got the brakes right here. This is a Hydro Boost, and I was going to show how I put that all together right here. This is massive. I know it was going to be big. I knew it was going to be big. But what it is, this is my brake pedal. This is my brake system, I should say. Now this is the master cylinder, and this is a Hydro Boost unit. I ordered this from Wide Open Design. I'm not affiliated with them. I wanted to have better brakes than my other buggy. My other buggy, the brakes work great going up hills, things like that, but when you want to drop off things, they leave a lot left to be desired. And what they are is a Willwood master cylinder with just Chevy 3/4 ton brakes. And the master cylinder just, I believe it doesn't have a big enough bore. I used to have a chart that explained that, and I got the biggest bore that those had, and it just didn't seem like it was big enough. It said it works good for crawling up trails, but when you want to go off big drops, the brakes just don't work great. This time, I'm trying these Hydro Boost. This is what the Rock Bouncer guys run. How it works, the power steering fluid goes through this. And so the power steering pump will be plumbed through here. And what it does is it helps assist the brakes to give you way more stopping power to each of the calipers. I plan on just running stock Super Duty stuff instead of going with Willwood and all that. You can save a lot of weight going with Willwood, but I'm not splitting hairs that much on this. I'm just getting by with Super Duty stuff. It's just the easiest way to go. So I've got to figure out how to package this giant setup over in that chassis. Now, I guess it's not that much bigger because really all you're adding is the Hydro Boost unit. What I'm doing is I've got to get that mounted in that chassis. After I got the Hydro Boost all assembled, what I did is I use these type fittings. This is an inverted flare to AN3 type fitting that comes out of the Hydro Boost right here. So what I do is then I run to AN3 stainless steel braided lines, and so one goes to the front and one goes to the rear. And so I just run, what I do is I just measure the entire length. This is all one piece. And what I do is I run it all the way to a T on the back axle. And then I run one to each caliper. So that's the rear. It's all AN3s, all AN3 fittings, AN3T, and then I use an AN3 connector to go to the caliper so that everything's AN3. And then I do the same thing for the front. I just measure one long run to a T to the front, and then use a flexible line to an AN3 connector at the caliper, and that's the brake system. I'm not using fancy cutting brakes or anything like that in this one. That's a nice touch to add. Cutting brakes are so you can just either lock up the front or the rear or whatever configuration you want. What I found is if you put it in the front only and just slightly tap your brakes, it kind of works that way as well. So that's how I'm doing the brake system. I'll be interested to see how this Hydro Boost works out and let everybody know once I get it up and going.